Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. How much due diligence are you going to do before drafting a prospect? Obviously, you're going to watch their game tape. You're going to want to talk to them and get a sense for where their head is at. You're going to want to talk to their coaches and other people close with them to get a better idea as to what their character is like. You're going to want to watch them work out and watch their performances at the NFL Combine in the relevant tests. This is all pretty basic stuff, especially for an early draft pick that you're going to be giving millions of dollars to on their first contract. But what about an 8th round pick in the 200s? How many resources are you going to devote to such a player? And how much time are you going to spend evaluating everything about them? Even though there's a chance you might not even draft him or find the answer that you want to hear. Well, this is Washington wide receiver Darryl Franklin, and in 1988, the Rams took the definition of doing their due diligence to another level. Imagine a team flying all the way up to the Pacific Northwest just to watch you run one 40-yard dash and then turning around and leaving. They literally flew up and spent upwards of 4 figures in resources for the sole purpose of watching 5 seconds unfold, and all for a player whose odds were somewhat against him for making it into the NFL in the first place. You can't fault the Rams for not going the extra mile here and doing everything in their power to get the full intel on him. And this is the story behind the craziest draft investment in the near 90-year history of the Los Angeles Rams franchise. Before I talk about the draft pick in question and everything that he was going through, we need some context to understand how the Rams were looking heading into the 1988 NFL Draft, and in particular, what they needed to address. The 1987 season was definitely a rough one for the Rams, and that's putting it lightly. During the strike-shortened 15-game season, they finished 6-9, which was their first time with a losing record under head coach John Robinson, and was the first time they ever missed the playoffs under his watch. For the first time since 1982, the Rams were going to be watching the playoffs from their home. And a big reason for that, and perhaps the number one reason for that, was their absolutely atrocious passing offense. The running game was fine. The team did not miss a beat when they traded Eric Dickerson to the Indianapolis Colts, as Charles White filled the void perfectly by leading the league in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, and by being named a Pro Bowler and a first-team All-Pro. The passing game, though, that was a different story. In just about every major statistical category, the Rams were near the bottom of the NFL. They finished 27th out of 28 teams in passing yards, and on 4 separate occasions, finished the game with less than 100 yards passing. In one particularly embarrassing game, which was a 48-0 loss to the San Francisco 49ers to close out the season in front of a national television audience on Sunday Night Football, they finished the game with 24 net passing yards on 18 attempts. They were averaging just over a yard per pass attempt. And starting quarterback Steve Dills finished that game by going 5 for 17, completing 29.4% of his passes while throwing no touchdowns and 1 interception, and while posting a passer rating of 15.1, which is worse than if it did nothing but spike the ball to the ground on every single play. The only team that the Rams threw more yards than in 1987 was the Pittsburgh Steelers, who somehow finished above 500 and were in the playoff hunt with Mark Malone at quarterback. Don't ask me how they did that. And they finished 23rd out of 28 teams in passing touchdowns, and between Steve Dills and Jim Everett, threw more interceptions than touchdowns. While the Rams didn't need a quarterback going into 1988, as they believed heavily in Jim Everett, the first-round pick that they gave up a lot to acquire, they knew that they needed to surround him with talent, and loads of it, because this current crop of receivers just wasn't cutting it. As a side note, to learn more about how the Rams acquired Everett in the first place, click the card in the upper right corner. No receiver on the Rams finished the 1987 season with more than 3 touchdowns. Outside of Henry Ellard, the team had absolutely no one, and besides Ellard and Ron Brown, not a single player on the Rams had 300 receiving yards. The only other player to even cross the 200-yard mark was Mike Uman, who was a fullback. And not a single player on the Rams outside of Ellard had 30 or more catches during the season, as Ellard was just about the only reliable threat on that team. Again, of all the reasons why they were 6-9, this was near the top. With that, the Rams had an idea for the 1988 NFL Draft to try and bolster this unit, and it's a strategy that the New England Patriots tried in 1998 when they drafted 3 running backs, and it's a strategy that I kind of admire. You can learn more about the Patriots strategy by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Because in 1988, the Rams' draft strategy was to just draft a bunch of receivers and see what sticks. The Rams had 14 picks to work with in the 12-round draft, and they decided that they were going to spend 4 of them, including some high draft capital, on the receiver position. They were going all out. They drafted Arizona State wide receiver Aaron Cox in the first round, although he was a bust, only recording 8 touchdowns and 1,600 yards in his 5 seasons with the team. They drafted UCLA wide receiver Flipper Anderson in the second round, and he was a great pick, having multiple seasons with over 1,000 yards, leading the league in yards per catch twice, and famously having a game on Sunday Night Football in 1989 against the New Orleans Saints, where he broke the NFL record for most receiving yards in a game by recording 336. That record still stands today. They drafted Southern Oregon wide receiver Jeff Beathard, although he never played in the NFL. And with their other pick at wide receiver, they drafted the man of the hour. Enter another receiver out of the Pac-10, the third one of this class, by the name of Darryl Franklin. In 1987, the Washington Huskies had a solid season out of the Pac-10. They finished the year with a 7-4-1 record, including a win against a ranked Arizona State team. They won their biggest rivalry game, winning the Apple Cup by 15 points over Washington State. They won the Independence Bowl over Tulane, and they spent roughly half the season ranked inside the top 25 of the AP poll. And in terms of who the most influential player on the offense was that helped Washington have a solid 1987 campaign, it was this man right here. This is wide receiver Darryl Franklin. And even though he had accrued stats with the team since the 1985 season, it was in 1987 when he was named the team captain and when his collegiate career really took off. During the 1987 season, Franklin recorded 43 receptions for 712 yards and 3 touchdowns, with those numbers not including his performance at the Independence Bowl, where he had a critical 5-yard touchdown catch at the end of the first half to give the Huskies the lead, which they never relinquished from that point on. That was the turning point. And while the 1987 season was a great year by Franklin for his standards, as he set or tied career highs in receptions, yards, touchdowns, and yards per catch, it was also a great year for him by the standards of the Pac-10. The conference and the country was taking notice at how Franklin played with his heart on his sleeve, never afraid to show emotion, and how diverse his route tree was, as he was pretty good at running any route you threw his way. During the 1987 season, he led Washington in receptions and receiving yards. He had some big shoes to fill after Lonzel Hill, their number 1 receiver from 1986, graduated and got drafted by the New Orleans Saints in the second round of the 1987 NFL Draft. And safe to say, he filled them and then some. His 43 receptions ranked 8th in the conference. His 712 receiving yards ranked 5th in the conference. And his 16.6 yards per reception ranked 9th in the conference. If you looked at every receiver in the Pac-10 in 1987, with at least 43 receptions, 700 receiving yards, and 16 yards per catch, you'd be looking at a list consisting of Arizona wide receiver Derek Hill, UCLA wide receiver Flipper Anderson, and Darryl Franklin. That was it. That's really good exclusive company to be in, especially since both Anderson and Hill would eventually get drafted within the first 3 rounds of the NFL Draft, with Anderson being a second-round pick in 1988, and Hill being a third-round pick in 1989. Franklin was being projected as one of those high picks as well. Some people had him as a second, third, or fourth-round pick, especially after a great 1987 season, especially after a great showing at the Independence Bowl, and especially after a very good All-Star season. He played in the Japan Bowl and recorded 4 catches while playing special teams, and even playing some cornerback after 2 corners got injured. And he also played in the Shrine Game, where he recorded 6 catches. In other words, the man was probably going to get drafted high, especially after a great 1987 season, and especially after a career where he caught 92 passes in 3 seasons and showed a lot of improvement, versatility, and leadership. All he had to do was not screw up at the NFL Combine, and he would be good to go. Seems pretty easy, right? Just do what you've been doing this whole time, and you're set. Well, that's not quite what happened with Franklin, because his performance at the Combine was the red flag of all red flags. Franklin admitted afterwards that he made a mistake playing in all of those All-Star games, because his body was completely drained by that point. He had a hamstring injury that he fought through. He was dealing with bronchitis, which he fought through. And now, after playing in all those postseason showcases, he was flying to Indianapolis to attend the NFL Combine and put his speed on display. It did not go well, as he was not at full strength. The 40-yard dash is the most scrutinized workout at the NFL Combine, and it's been that way forever. For a guy like Franklin, because of his style of play, he needed a good showing at this drill, especially since the Combine had a lot of guys like Brett Perryman, Anthony Miller, and Tim Brown who were absolute speedsters and could win a foot race with just about anyone. And Darryl Franklin ran a 4.75. For a receiver like Franklin, especially one who did a lot of his damage on short passes, to run a 4.75 is abysmal. Heck, it's abysmal for any receiver. Of the 43 receivers that year to run the 40-yard dash, he ranked 36th. After that bad run, a lot of people dropped him down on their boards, or removed him from them entirely, especially since they believed that he was 5 to 6 steps slower than Lonzo Hill, who was drafted by the Saints the year before, and Hill wasn't exactly killing anyone with his speed in the NFL. Understandably, Franklin was disappointed in his performance at the Combine, and knew that it was going to hurt him. As he said on the scouts after that, "They think I'm as slow as a turtle. It is hard as hell for someone to wear off the past. They say what you ran is what you are." However, he issued a challenge to the scouts. He wanted a do-over. He said that he was sick, that he shouldn't have even participated, and that his performance at the Combine wasn't the real him. He wanted the second chance of all second chances. Franklin said in the days leading up to the draft, "A couple of weeks ago, I ran a 4.39 and a 4.4 for about 4 or 5 scouts who were at the university. I've been running good times for everybody who has been coming by. I want everyone to rerun me. At the Combine, I was a little sick because I got bronchitis at the Japan Bowl. I had a really bad hamstring from the East-West Shrine game. I'm nowhere near that slow." Franklin was asking teams to fly all the way up to Seattle to have him redo his 40-yard dash. This was not a pro day. This was not a workout. This was not an interview or anything like that. He wanted teams to spend a ton of money to send a scout up to Washington to watch him run for 4 seconds and then immediately turn around and leave. Understandably, a lot of teams did not take Franklin up on this somewhat crazy offer, and it makes sense why, outside of the reliability of hand-time 40-yard dashes. That's a lot of resources to devote to a late draft pick, especially this close to the draft when there surely can be a better use of some of the scouting department's time. On top of that, there is already debate as to how meaningful a 40-yard dash truly is, because for a lot of people, it's completely meaningless, because you're never going to be running like that in an actual game. But there was one team that, amazingly enough, took up Franklin's offer. There was one team that was willing to make the trip, spend money on airfare and cabs and all that, and immediately return just to watch him run for 4 seconds, and just to see if he shaved time off of his 4.75 40 time from Indianapolis. And that team, as you might have guessed, was the Los Angeles Rams. Franklin said on his poor performance at the Combine after his great performance in the All-Star games that when he went to Indianapolis, his 40 time was so bad that it erased everything he did in those 2 weeks. One report said that he begged the Rams to give him a chance for a do-over, to which the Rams amazingly enough complied. And while we have no idea what he ran during this second opportunity, it was apparently good enough that the Rams liked what they saw, and some doubts that they might have had about Franklin going into the draft after that horrible Combine performance were cleared up. Because when the 8th round of the NFL draft rolled around, with pick number 201, the Rams, despite taking 2 receivers early already, thought that they could afford to take another one. They took Washington wideout Darryl Franklin after investing so much into him, relatively speaking. And head coach John Robinson seemed thrilled about it, saying after the draft that the passing cast was pretty well assembled, and saying what the Rams tried to do on the second day, "We'll race anybody in the draft." The Rams had a need for speed, and that comment by Robinson could have easily been a subtle shot at the rest of the league that Franklin's not as slow as he showed in Indy, because we did our due diligence and flew out and gave him a second chance. However, this was one of those instances in school where you do the homework and you put forth your best effort, putting in tons of work, and at the end of the day, the teacher doesn't even check it, making all your hard work for nothing. Because the Rams, despite their incredible diligence, and despite putting in the effort when a lot of teams didn't do that to fly out to watch a guy run for 4 seconds, did not find the next draft steal. Darryl Franklin did nothing in the NFL. In fact, he didn't even play a game, getting cut before the end of the 1988 preseason, and never finding his way on another team. It was always going to be somewhat of an uphill climb for an 8th round pick to make the roster. 9 of the players taken that year in the 8th round never played a down in the NFL. However, it has to hurt the Rams just a bit that the very next receiver off the board was Oregon wideout J.J. Burden, who played until 1996 and had a very solid career for an 8th round pick by finishing with just under 3,500 yards and 17 touchdowns. There are a lot of times where teams do not do their due diligence on a player, and don't do the necessary background checks or the workouts or the interviews or the psychological evaluations. And then there's the Rams, who did all of this for an 8th round pick. It didn't work out, but you have to admire the process that the Rams went through just to make sure that this guy was the real deal. The fact that they were willing to have a scout fly up to Washington just to watch a guy run for 4 seconds and then immediately turn around with no other fanfare or activities attached, and the fact that they were willing to comply with Franklin's somewhat crazy wishes of wanting a complete do-over from the NFL Combine is somewhat crazy. No, the pick did not work out, but you definitely cannot fault the Rams in this instance for a lack of effort, because it's safe to say that when it came to Darryl Franklin, they did their due diligence, went the extra mile, and then some. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.